Yoshi, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk with us. How did you, so you play Philip, we should
I
say.
do.
How did you get involved with The Chosen?
Well, you want the long story or the short story? I mean,
Well,
yeah, 10 minutes, right? Well, I mean, I auditioned.
yeah.
That's the boring version of the story, but the more entertaining version of the story, and I'll try to condense it for you, is I had a lot of sort of serendipitous moments in my life that led up to me being sort of able to be receiving towards a project like this that would make me motivated enough to want it. And that was, something like discovering lectures about the psychological significance of the Old Testament parables, right? So before those lectures, I had no idea how mysterious these parables were and how it took a lot of work to sort of decode what they all mean. I thought that I didn't realize that these stories were potentially metaphors, and so through that, I was able to, intellectually find a way to have interest in the Bible, and then I had a moment. Um, should I go into it again? I had a moment when I was on a hike in Los Angeles, and I was sort of working through some stuff. In my late 20s at the time, and I heard some chirping to my left and some female voices kind of freaking out. And I look over, and it was like all this commotion, and I wasn't too sure what was going on. So I paid it no mind, and I went back to the book that I was reading. And then the commotion eventually died down, and I suddenly heard a voice say, "Hey, what are you reading over there?" And I look over, and it was Justin Bieber. And I look over, and I told him what I was reading, and we start conversing from afar. And I was like, "I can't really hear you, man. Why don't you come join me?" So he did, and we sort of related on some of the trauma that we were working through, and had a conversation on this cliffside for some time. And he interrupted me at one point and said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really feel in my bones that I'm meant to introduce you to my church. So would you come? And at the time, I had no real interest in any kind of church, but as I said to him, I'm not going to say no to you, man. You're Justin Bieber, so let's go. But he was really cool about it. He's like, if you like it, we'll stay, and if you don't, then we can go and grab a beer. And so I was like, all right, cool. No pressure. Let's go. Long story short, I ended up going to that church every Wednesday for about 6 months. And so I had the Old Testament in my head, and now suddenly I'm learning the New Testament from this church that wasn't trying to pull me in. They weren't trying to convert me in any kind of way. They were just teaching the parables of the New Testament and explaining what they might mean. So I have all this knowledge now about what the Bible's about. I'm reading it on my own for the first time, and suddenly this audition comes in. And so I felt very prepared for it, and it felt like something I really wanted and was really motivated to get. And so, and here we are.
So whether it's your serendipitous, bizarre kind of conversation with Justin Bieber that came out of nowhere, or it's your work on The Chosen, how has it maybe changed or maybe even challenged your perspective of faith and scripture? How have you re-examined it in the wake of being a part of this?
Well, I think that, I think that you don't need, everyone's free to go about their relationship with a faith system as they like. But I think what's beautiful about the show and what I've learned from being a part of it is that you don't need to do things in accordance with how a group of people are doing things. You could just read the scripture, read the text, and try to understand it yourself. And I think what's beautiful about the show is that it's this sort of, magic school bus diving into the Bible type situation where you're getting this visual environment coming to life, and the words on the page are coming to life, and you're getting to explore that space. And it's sort of humanizing the parables for people, and certainly for the cast. Regardless of what our faith system was or is, I think we can all agree that these stories are meaningful and that there's deep old wisdom in them, and you can take it for that and leave it as that. You don't need to take it beyond there. But if you're motivated to go on a journey with it in your own way, then that's great too. So hopefully, the show is approachable in that nature for all kinds of people, and you can do with it what you will.
I think one of the things that's so impactful about The Chosen, at least for me, has been that it's so people focused. Obviously, Jesus is at the center of the storyline, but all of it is about relationship and building relationship with one another among the disciples, and how they banter back and forth with and wrestle with the Romans and all of that. How have you maybe prepared some of that yourself on the prep side, getting ready to play this role of Philip? What does that process look like for you, getting ready to delve into these dialogues with these characters?
It's a great question, and it's so funny because I keep finding these similarities between what we're doing and what the disciples are trying to do. A lot. I mean, everyone approaches the craft of acting. There's many different ways of approaching it, but I've always kind of seen it like a sport, and I sort of prepare like maybe an athlete would for like a game. But I'm learning. I've learned through being a part of this show, like what my approach to the craft is. And I think that the disciples, a lot of what they're learning by following Jesus is the sacrifice of the self, the sacrifice of expectations, the sacrifice of ideals for the service of this thing. And coincidentally, I think that the best work that I do, or that anyone does really, is when you show up and you're prepared, you've done the work, but when you show up, it's time to let go and to just be present and vigilant and reactionary. And so that sort of surrendering to the flow of things, I think, is when I'm doing my best work, because you can show up and you have an idea of how this scene is supposed to play out, and you thought it was in this tone, but then the director and the actors you're working with are in a whole different tone. And so how do you do that? Do you combat or do you surrender? But maybe your version of the scene is valuable as well. So there's this kind of dance that goes on there, and that dance, I think, is kind of like what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples, is how to have a communion with that dance, like that sort of voice, or whatever you want to call it. Like you were chosen to be here for a reason. So trust that you are enough, and let's drop everything else and surrender to this moment, and let's allow ourselves to be like a sort of hollow flute for God to play us through, And so there are these weird similarities between what the disciples are trying to learn and what I'm trying to learn as an actor.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what the disciples need to do is drop their expectations and stop making the way that they interact with their environments about them and what they want and what they desire, and rather just let it all go and be there in service of something bigger than them.
I think one of the most fascinating things about this series is the appeal that it has to a non-believing audience, a non-Christian audience in particular, because obviously that's kind of a built-in natural audience. You would assume, okay, the church-going group, the Christian crowd, are going to be into this because it's the story of Jesus.
Sure.
But there's also so many skeptical people, agnostic people, people who are searching both on the cast and in the audience.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Why is there an appeal to non-believers to watch something like The Chosen?
I mean, it's a complicated question, but I think that Dallas, Tyler, and Ryan, and everyone who makes this show, they do a really good job in making this approachable to all people. There isn't so much an element of we are in a secret group that knows the truth to reality. And if you want to come in, you're going to have to like think like us or behave like us. I think that, if we're doing the show justice, what we're doing is we're just trying to take this text and create a visual environment that represents what the text says.
Yeah.
And then for that, here's I hope we have time. I'll try to make this quick, but this just came to my mind. Like Stranger Things just did. I haven't seen it, but I'm aware of this phenomenon with Kate Bush, where, because my girlfriend who's sitting over here is a huge Kate Bush fan, and Kate Bush has this song, Running Up That Hill, that she made in the 80s that, was big with Kate Bush fans, but, was never on the charts or anything, and has long been forgotten unless you're a Kate Bush fan, or, like a deeply musical person. And suddenly, Stranger Things uses the song in their season finale, and the younger generation, that's on TikTok and stuff, just like blows up. The song blows up. They fall in love with it. And I think they never would have discovered that song on their own, because I think some songs might need a visual acuity, a visual representation for people for their synapses to connect the dots, like otherwise they might hear the song and it might not even register with them. But the visual representation combined with the song creates this narrative for them that they're able to then understand, and then they become huge fans of the song, and the song blows up on TikTok, and suddenly Kate Bush has the #1 song in the world, 40 years after she made the song, which is just insane. But I think maybe there's a similar phenomenon happening with our show, is that people who are agnostic or just not interested in faith now will have a way of understanding the text without all this dogma surrounding their entryway. They're able to just freely make up their minds for themselves and connect to the material with their eyes now. So maybe there's a similar sort of thing happening there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Yoshi. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Trey.
your time.
Appreciate your time as well. Thank you.